The Workshop of the Time Weaver, Part 1, The Inheritance. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, which Elara Thorne would later reflect was fitting, given that Tuesdays had always felt suspended between past and future, never quite present. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, and sealed with dark blue wax, impressed with a symbol she didn't recognize, an hourglass intertwined with what appeared to be thread, or perhaps lightning. She turned it over in her hands 3 times before opening it, standing in the narrow hallway of her Boston apartment while rain pelted the windows. The return address simply read, Grimsby and Associates, Solicitors, Edinburgh, Scotland. Dear Miss Thorne, we regret to inform you of the passing of your great-uncle, Cornelius Thorne, on the 3rd of October. As his sole surviving relative, you are the beneficiary of his estate, which includes his residence and workshop at 47 Clockmaker's Close, Edinburgh, as well as all contents therein. We request your presence at our offices at your earliest convenience to settle matters of inheritance. Please be advised that the property cannot remain unoccupied for more than 30 days as per the terms of Mr. Thorne's will. Our condolences for your loss. Elara read the letter twice more, her mind struggling to place this great-uncle she'd never met, never even heard mentioned. Her mother had died when she was young, and her father, who'd passed 3 years ago, had rarely spoken of his family beyond vague references to old country relatives he'd lost touch with decades ago. She pulled out her phone and booked a flight for the following week. Part 2, Clockmaker's Close. Edinburgh in November was a study in grey skies, grey stone, grey mist that rolled through the streets like something alive. Elara's taxi wound through the new town's Georgian streets before plunging into the medieval maze of the old town, where buildings leaned toward each other as if sharing secrets. Clockmaker's Close was barely wider than the taxi itself, a narrow venel that dropped steeply between 2 ancient buildings. The driver refused to go farther, muttering something about the cobblestones and insurance, so Elara hefted her suitcase and continued on foot. Number 47 stood at the close's end, a narrow 3-story building of dark stone that seemed to drink in the surrounding shadows. Its windows were tall and arched, their glass rippled with age, reflecting nothing. A brass plaque beside the door read, C. Thorne, Horologist. The key the solicitor had given her was heavy and ornate, carved with the same hourglass and thread symbol from the letter. It turned smoothly in the lock, and the door swung inward without a sound. The smell hit her first, old paper, machine oil, wood polish, and something else, something almost like ozone after a lightning strike. The entrance hall was narrow and dark, its walls lined with clocks. Dozens of them, hundreds, tall case clocks and carriage clocks, wall clocks and pocket watches displayed in glass cases. None of them were running. They all showed different times, as if frozen in various moments, monuments to stopped seconds. "Hello," Elara called out. Her voice fell flat in the stillness, absorbed by the layers of silence. She found a light switch and gasped as warm light flooded the space. The workshop, for that's what the ground floor clearly was, stretched back much farther than the building's exterior suggested. Workbenches lined the walls, covered with tools she couldn't name, delicate picks and tweezers, tiny hammers, magnifying glasses on articulated arms, and trays of gears and springs in graduated sizes. But it was the center of the room that drew her eye. A loom stood there, massive and intricate, built of dark wood that gleamed with a patina of age and use. But this was no ordinary loom. Its frame was set with countless tiny gears, and where thread should have been, thin filaments of something that looked like spun light stretched across its width. The floor around it was marked with symbols, mathematical equations, astronomical charts, diagrams she couldn't begin to decipher. Elara approached slowly, her footsteps loud in the silence. As she drew near, the filaments seemed to shimmer, throwing impossible shadows on the walls. Shadows that moved against the light source. Shadows that showed scenes. A street market that looked medieval. A battlefield. A woman in Victorian dress weeping by a window. A child laughing in a garden that might have been yesterday or a century ago. "What the hell?" Elara whispered. A voice behind her said, "I was hoping you'd have a better reaction than that." Elara spun around, her heart hammering. A woman stood in the doorway she'd entered through, short, perhaps 60, with steel-gray hair cut in a sharp bob. She wore a tweed suit and carried a leather satchel that looked as old as the building itself. "I'm Dr. Margaret Ashford," the woman said, extending her hand. "I was your great-uncle's colleague, I suppose, and friend. I'm sorry for your loss, though I suspect you didn't know him well enough for this to be much of a loss. Yet." "Yet?" Elara shook the offered hand. "Who are you? What is this place? What is that?" She gestured at the loom. Dr. Ashford smiled, but it was a sad smile. "Those are excellent questions, all of which have rather alarming answers. Would you like tea first? I find these conversations go better with tea." Part 3. The Truth About Time. They sat in the kitchen on the second floor, a surprisingly cozy room with copper pans hanging from the ceiling and a window overlooking a small garden that was overgrown with roses, blooming impossibly in November. Dr. Ashford made tea with the practiced ease of someone familiar with the space. "Your great-uncle Cornelius was a time weaver," she began without preamble, setting a cup in front of Elara. "Not a time traveler, mind you. The distinction is important. He didn't travel through time. He wove it." Elara wrapped her hands around the warm cup, trying to process this. That's not possible. Time isn't a thing you can weave. It's not fabric." "Isn't it?" Dr. Ashford raised an eyebrow. "What is fabric but threads arranged in a pattern? And what is time but moments arranged in sequence? Your great-uncle understood something that most people don't, that time, like cloth, has a warp and a weft, and if you know how to manipulate those threads, you can adjust the pattern. You're talking about changing the past." "No," Dr. Ashford's voice was sharp. "That's precisely what time weavers don't do. The past is woven tight. Change even one thread and the entire fabric unravels. What your uncle did was far more subtle and far more important. He mended time." Elara stared at her. "Mended it? Time has flaws, gaps, places where the weave has come loose or threads have snapped. Most people never notice them. They manifest as déjà vu, as that feeling of a forgotten moment, as dreams that feel more real than waking. But these flaws can grow. They can create paradoxes, can trap people in loops, can cause entire moments to simply cease to exist. Time weavers find these flaws and repair them. And you expect me to believe this? I expect you to believe your own eyes." Dr. Ashford nodded toward the window. Elara looked out at the garden. As she watched, the roses bloomed, wilted, and returned to buds in the space of seconds, cycling through seasons in a loop. Then, just as suddenly, they settled back into November blooms, as if nothing had happened. "The garden is caught in a small temporal loop," Dr. Ashford explained. "Your uncle was working on fixing it when he died. Harmless, really. Just a bit of time that got confused and is trying to experience all 4 seasons at once." Elara's hands were shaking. She set down her teacup before she could spill it. "Why me? I don't know anything about this. I'm a software engineer, for God's sake. I debug code, not time." "Debugging," Dr. Ashford said thoughtfully. "That's not a bad analogy, actually. And you're here because time weaving runs in bloodlines. It's not something you can learn if you don't have the genetic predisposition for it. Cornelius had no children, and his siblings, your grandfather and grandmother, left Scotland decades ago. The talent skipped your father's generation, apparently, but Cornelius sensed it in you. He's been watching you from afar, waiting to see if the gift manifested. I don't have any gift. Don't you? Dr. Ashford leaned forward. Have you ever known exactly what time it was without looking at a clock? Have you ever felt that a moment was too long or too short, even though the clock said otherwise? Have you ever dreamed of events that haven't happened yet? Or remembered things that never occurred? Ilara opened her mouth to deny it, then stopped. She thought of the dreams she'd had since childhood, vivid, detailed dreams of places she'd never been, of people she'd never met, all of them carrying that strange weight of memory rather than imagination. She thought of how she'd always been able to estimate time with uncanny accuracy, how she'd once surprised her coworkers by telling them it was exactly 3:42 p.m. when they'd asked, only to discover she was right to the second, despite not having looked at a clock for hours. Those could be coincidences, she said weakly. They could be, Dr. Ashford agreed. But they're not. Come, let me show you the loom properly. Part 4. The First Thread. Back in the workshop, Dr. Ashford lit candles in addition to the electric lights. The loom responds better to firelight, she explained. Something about the flicker, the inconstancy. Time doesn't flow at a steady rate, you see, despite what the physicists claim. It pulses, it breathes. Up close, the loom was even more magnificent and terrifying. The threads stretched across it weren't just glowing. They hummed with a sound just below hearing, a vibration Ilara felt in her bones rather than heard with her ears. Each thread is a timeline, Dr. Ashford said, running her fingers just above them without quite touching. This one here, she indicated a bright silver thread. That's today, November 14th, 2024, in Edinburgh. But look here. She pointed to a place where the thread seemed to fray, splitting into thinner strands. This is a weak point, a moment where time is confused, where several possible timelines are trying to exist simultaneously. Ilara leaned closer, and as she did, images flashed in her mind. A car accident at a crossroads, the same moment played out in 5 different ways, each one overlapping the others. In one version, the car swerved left. In another, right. In a third, it stopped in time. The fourth and fifth versions showed variations so subtle she couldn't quite grasp them. Why is this happening? She asked. Someone made a choice and then unmade it, and then made it again. They dithered at a crucial moment, creating quantum uncertainty in what should have been a resolved timeline. It's a small flaw. The car either crashes or doesn't. The timeline will settle one way or another eventually. But these small flaws can cascade. They can interact with other weak points, create interference patterns. If left unchecked, they can tear holes in the fabric of time itself. Dr. Ashford reached into her satchel and pulled out what looked like a spindle, the kind that might have come from a fairy tale. It was made of a dark wood that seemed to absorb light, and its shaft was carved with intricate symbols. This is a weaver's spindle. Your uncle's spare. He was using his primary spindle when he died, and it died with him. These tools are attuned to their users. This one hasn't bonded with anyone yet. If you have the gift, it will accept you. She held it out to Ilara, who hesitated before taking it. The spindle was heavier than it looked, and warm, as if it had been held in someone's hands for hours. The moment her fingers closed around it, she felt something click into place, like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known was there. The workshop shifted around her. Suddenly she could see the threads more clearly, not just on the loom, but everywhere. They stretched through the air, through the walls, through her own body, past, present, and future, woven together in an impossible tapestry. She saw the thread of her own timeline, stretching back to her birth and forward into a haze of possibility. She saw it brush against other threads, intertwining with them at points of connection. Her parents, her friends, strangers she'd passed on the street, whose lives had touched hers in ways she'd never known. "Oh," she breathed. "Oh, I see it." "Yes," Dr. Ashford said softly. "Now you see, and once you see, you can't unsee. The question is, what will you do with this sight?" Part 5. The First Mending. Over the next 3 days, Dr. Ashford taught Ilara the basics of time weaving. It was like learning to see in a new spectrum of light. Overwhelming at first, then gradually comprehensible. "Think of yourself as a conservator of tapestries," Dr. Ashford explained as they worked together in the early morning light. "You're not creating new threads or destroying old ones. You're identifying damage and making repairs that preserve the original intent of the weave." The technique was meditative, requiring a state of focused relaxation that reminded Ilara of the flow state she sometimes achieved while coding. She had to perceive the timeline in question, identify the flaw, and then use the spindle to gently coax the threads back into proper alignment. Her first attempt was on a small flaw Dr. Ashford had found, a loop in the timeline of a teacup. The cup had been broken and mended so many times that its timeline was tangled, trying to exist in all its states simultaneously. Whole, broken, mended, broken again. Ilara sat before the loom with the cup beside her, following Dr. Ashford's instructions. She cleared her mind, focused on the spindle, and reached out with senses she was only beginning to understand. She could feel the cup's timeline, confused and snarled. Gently, carefully, she began to untangle it, separating the threads of its various states, helping them settle into their proper sequence. The spindle grew hot in her hands, the threads on the loom shimmered and rearranged themselves. And then, suddenly, it was done. The teacup sat on the bench, definitively whole, its timeline smooth and clean. The sensation of temporal confusion that had surrounded it was gone. "Well done," Dr. Ashford said, and there was genuine warmth in her voice. "You have a natural talent. Your uncle would have been pleased." "How did he die?" Ilara asked. It was the first time she'd asked directly. Dr. Ashford's expression grew somber. "He was attempting to mend a major flaw, a tear in time large enough to affect thousands of people. The flaw was too complex, too deeply rooted. He poured too much of himself into the mending, and it consumed him. We found him here, at the loom, his hands still on the threads. He looked peaceful, at least. What happened to the flaw he was trying to fix? It's still there, growing worse by the day." Dr. Ashford pulled a leather-bound journal from her satchel and opened it to a page marked with a black ribbon. The page was covered in Cornelius Thorne's spidery handwriting, interspersed with diagrams and calculations. He documented everything, of course. The flaw is located in Edinburgh, centered on Greyfriars Kirkyard. It began as a small loop, the same night repeating. But it's been expanding. People are getting caught in it, living the same hours over and over without realizing it. And it's spreading, pulling more of the city into its influence. Ilara felt ice in her stomach. How many people? At last count, around 300 souls trapped in a temporal loop, experiencing the night of October 3rd over and over. That was the night your uncle died, not coincidentally. He was trying to seal the loop from within when it overcame him. Can't someone else fix it? Someone with more experience than me? There are only 12 time weavers left in the world, Ilara. 3 are too old to work major weaves. 4 are dealing with critical flaws in other locations. There's a growing problem in Tokyo, another in Cairo. 3 more are missing, lost in their own failed mending attempts. That leaves you and me. And I'm good, but I'm not good enough for this. I'm a theorist, not a practitioner. I study time weaving, but I can't do it myself. I don't have the gift. But I've only been doing this for 3 days, which is 3 more days than we have to waste. Dr. Ashford closed the journal. The loop is becoming stable. If it solidifies, those 300 people will be trapped forever, living the same night for eternity. And that's just the beginning. A stabilized loop that large can create a dead zone in time, a place where nothing can move forward. It will spread slowly but inexorably until it swallows the entire city, then the region, then further. Given enough time, it could consume the whole timeline. Ilara stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Edinburgh skyline. Somewhere out there, 300 people were trapped in a nightmare they didn't even know they were experiencing, and she was being asked to save them with skills she'd barely begun to learn. "What if I fail like my uncle did?" she asked quietly. "Then you fail, and we try to find another solution." Dr. Ashford came to stand beside her. "But if you don't try at all, they're already lost." Elara closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the spindle in her pocket. She could sense the threads of time all around her, the vast tapestry of existence. And somewhere in that weave there was a tear, a wound. Part 6, the Grey Friars Loop. They spent the rest of that day and all of the next preparing. Dr. Ashford guided Elara through her uncle's notes, helping her understand the nature of the flaw. The loop had begun on October 3rd at precisely 10:47 p.m. in the Greyfriars Kirkyard, Edinburgh's famous historic cemetery. The initial cause was unclear. Cornelius's notes suggested it might have been caused by a confluence of factors: the anniversary of a significant historical event, an unusual alignment of ley lines, and what he called temporal fatigue in an area that had experienced too much emotional intensity over too many centuries. "Places can wear out," Dr. Ashford explained. "Time grows thin in locations where many significant moments have occurred. Greyfriars has seen centuries of history, executions, battles, thousands upon thousands of deaths. All those intense moments, all that emotion, it weakens the fabric of time." The loop itself was approximately 4 hours long, running from 10:47 p.m. to 2:47 a.m. People who entered the affected area after 10:47 would find themselves back at 10:47 when the loop reset, with no memory of having experienced those hours before. They would live through the same 4 hours, make the same choices, have the same conversations, over and over. "The truly horrifying part," Dr. Ashford said, "is that they don't consciously remember, but somewhere deep in their subconscious, they're aware. It manifests as a growing sense of dread, of wrongness." The psychiatric wards at the Royal Edinburgh Hospital have seen a significant uptick in admissions from people in the affected area. Ilara studied the map Dr. Ashford had laid out, showing the expanding boundary of the loop. It had started at just the kirkyard, but now encompassed several surrounding blocks. "How do we stop it?" "According to your uncle's notes, the loop has an anchor point, a specific moment in time and space that's holding it in place. Find that anchor, sever its connection to the timeline, and the loop should collapse." "Should?" "Time weaving is as much art as science." Dr. Ashford shrugged. Even Cornelius, with 40 years of experience, couldn't be certain of the outcome. That evening they walked to Greyfriars. The air grew thick and strange as they approached, taking on a quality like honey, like moving through something resistant. Ilara could feel the wrongness of it, a pulsing wrongness that made her teeth ache. The kirkyard gates were locked for the night, but Dr. Ashford produced a key. "Cornelius had an arrangement with the night watchman," she explained. The cemetery spread before them, gravestones and monuments crowding the dark ground, trees spreading skeletal branches overhead. At exactly 10:47, Ilara felt the world hitch. It was like a record skipping, a brief moment of discontinuity, and then time began again. But it had a looped quality now, a sense of moving in a circle rather than forward. She pulled out her spindle and held it up, using it like a dowsing rod. The threads were visible here, more so than anywhere she'd yet seen them. They formed a tangled knot in the air above the cemetery, a snarl of timelines so complex it made her head hurt to look at it. And at the center of that snarl, something dark pulsed with a rhythm like a heartbeat. "The anchor," she breathed. They made their way through the cemetery, following the pull of the disturbed time. Ilara's perception of the world around her began to fragment. She could see echoes of other loops, previous iterations playing out like ghosts. There, a couple arguing by the entrance gate, the same argument repeating with slight variations. There, a cat stalking between gravestones, living and dying and living again in an endless cycle. The anchor point was at the Martyrs' Monument, a tall stone memorial near the cemetery's rear wall. As they approached it, the sense of wrongness intensified to the point of nausea. Ilara could see the tangled threads more clearly now, thousands of them all knotted together, creating a temporal knot that trapped these 4 hours in an endless recursion. "I don't understand," she said. "How do I even begin to untangle this?" Dr. Ashford was studying the monument, running her hands over its surface. "Look here," she said, and her voice was strange. "These marks." Ilara looked. Carved into the base of the monument, nearly invisible in the darkness, were symbols. The same symbols that were carved into her spindle, that had been on the seal of her uncle's letter. A figure stepped into the dim light cast by the street lamps beyond the cemetery wall. A man, tall and thin, dressed in an old-fashioned coat that might have been fashionable a century ago. His face was ageless in the way that could mean 30 or 50 or any age in between. "Who are you?" Ilara demanded, raising her spindle defensively. The man smiled. "I am what your uncle should have become. I am a time weaver who understands what we truly are, gods among insects." Part 7. The Weaver's War. Dr. Ashford positioned herself between Ilara and Silas Crane, her body tense. "You're supposed to be dead," she said. "Cornelius told me you were killed in Prague in 1989, caught in a paradox of your own making." Crane laughed, the sound echoing strangely in the loop-twisted air. "Is that what he told you?" "No, Margaret, I merely let him believe I was gone. It's easier to work when people don't know you're working." "You created this loop," Ilara said. "Why? What's the point of trapping 300 people in 4 hours of hell?" "Hell?" Crane raised an eyebrow. "I've given them immortality of a kind. They'll never grow old, never die, never lose what they have in this moment. And more importantly, they've provided me with an endless supply of temporal energy to fuel my greater work. Temporal energy. Every moment generates energy as it passes from future to present to past. In a loop, that energy doesn't dissipate, it circulates, builds on itself. I've been harvesting it for weeks now. Do you have any idea what one can do with that much temporal energy?" His eyes gleamed with a zealot's fire. "I can reweave time itself. Not just mend it, but reshape it. Make it what it should be, what it was meant to be before weak fools like your uncle decided we should only fix what's broken." "You're insane," Ilara said. "I'm visionary." Crane took a step closer, and Ilara felt the temperature drop. "Time is wasted on humanity. They use it so poorly, squander it on trivialities, throw away their years on mistakes and regrets. I will create a world where time moves as it should, where every moment has purpose and meaning. By trapping people in loops, by stealing their lives, by perfecting existence." Crane's voice took on a hypnotic quality. "Think about it, Ilara. You've had the gift for mere days, and already you can see what I see. The waste, the inefficiency, the terrible mistakes people make with their time. Join me. Together we could reshape the world's timeline. We could create a reality where suffering is eliminated, where humanity lives in perfect harmony, where every moment is optimized for maximum flourishing." For a heartbeat, Ilara was tempted. She could see it, the vision he was describing, a world without war, without hunger, without the terrible accidents of history that had caused so much pain. All it would require was taking control, making the hard choices that humanity was too fractured to make for itself. Then she looked at Dr. Ashford's face and saw the horror there, the recognition of a familiar temptation. He came to Cornelius with this same offer, Dr. Ashford said quietly. 10 years ago, your uncle refused and spent the rest of his life hunting Crane, trying to undo the damage he'd already done. Ilara felt the weight of her spindle in her hand, felt the threads of time flowing around her. She thought of the teacup she'd mended, how the technique required respecting what the object was, helping it be itself rather than forcing it into a new shape. No, she said, you're not talking about perfecting existence. You're talking about control, about making people live according to your idea of what's right. That's not time-weaving. That's tyranny. Crane's expression hardened. Then you choose to stand with the failures and the fools. So be it. He raised his own spindle, a twisted black thing that seemed to drink in light. I had hoped to gain an ally. Instead, I'll simply remove an obstacle. What happened next occurred faster than thought. Crane thrust his spindle toward the knotted threads above the monument, and they blazed with black fire. The loop shuddered and tightened. Ilara could feel it constricting, the 4 hours compressing toward a single moment, a singularity that would trap everyone caught within it in one eternal instant. Without thinking, purely on instinct, Ilara raised her own spindle and reached for the threads. She could feel them now, understand them in a way she hadn't just moments before. They weren't just lines in space, they were possibility, potential, the infinite ways a moment could unfold. She pulled, not to untangle, but to loosen, to give the compressed moment room to breathe and expand. Light blazed from her spindle, silver white, meeting and countering the black fire from Crane's. The graveyard filled with impossible light. Shadows moved in wrong directions. The air split into layers, past and present and future, all visible simultaneously. Ilara could see the cemetery as it had been centuries ago, open ground before the stones were placed. She could see it as it was now. She could see it as it might be in the future, overgrown or preserved or transformed into something else entirely. And through it all she could feel Crane pushing, trying to force the timeline into his desired shape, while she fought simply to keep it free, to preserve its ability to flow and change and grow. You can't win, Crane snarled, his voice distorted by the temporal distortion surrounding them. I've been doing this for decades. You've had 3 days. Maybe, Ilara gasped, sweat running down her face from the effort of holding the thread stable. But I'm not trying to win. I'm just trying to give these people back their time. She could feel it then, the difference between them. Crane was trying to impose his will on the threads, to force them into the pattern he wanted. But the threads resisted. Time itself resisted being controlled so absolutely. His technique was brute force, and it left him constantly fighting against the natural flow. Ilara's approach, taught by Dr. Ashford and inherited from her uncle, was different. She wasn't trying to control. She was trying to understand, to listen to what the threads wanted to be, to help them return to their natural pattern. The knot at the center of the loop began to loosen. Crane felt it too. His expression shifted from confidence to fury to fear in rapid succession. No, he said. No, I've worked too hard. I'm too close. He pushed more power into his spindle, and Ilara felt the threads strain under the force. They were going to snap. If they snapped while this tangled, the entire loop would collapse catastrophically, creating a void in time that would swallow everyone in it. Dr. Ashford, Ilara shouted. The monument! Find the original anchor point! While Crane was focused on Ilara, Dr. Ashford had been examining the monument, using a flashlight to study the carved symbols. Here, she called. There's a thread bound into the stone itself. Cut it. Anything sharp, just cut it." Dr. Ashford pulled a pocket knife from her bag and began sawing at something Ilara couldn't see from her position. Crane realized what they were doing and tried to turn his attention to stop her, but that meant loosening his grip on the loop. Ilara seized the opportunity. She poured everything she had into her spindle, every ounce of concentration, every bit of the instinct that had been awakening in her since she'd arrived in Edinburgh. She reached for the threads not with force but with understanding, not trying to control them but to free them, to help them remember how to flow forward rather than circle endlessly back. There was a sound like breaking glass. The thread in the monument parted under Dr. Ashford's knife. The anchor point dissolved, and suddenly, blessedly, the loop collapsed not inward but outward, the threads springing back to their natural configuration like a released spring. Time lurched forward. Ilara felt it like a physical sensation, the movement from circular to linear time. The oppressive weight lifted. The 4 trapped hours uncoiled and continued into 2:48 a.m., into 2:49, into the future that had been denied to them. Crane screamed, a sound of pure rage and despair. The black fire around his spindle flared and then went out. He staggered backward, and for a moment Ilara saw him clearly. Not an ageless figure of power, but a man who had poured so much of himself into his work that there was nothing left. His timeline was thin, frayed, held together only by force of will. "This isn't over," he said, but his voice was weak. "There are others who think as I do. You've won today, but the war between the Weavers continues. It always has, always will." And then he was gone, not vanishing, but simply not there, as if he'd edited himself out of the moment. Ilara collapsed to her knees, the spindle falling from her numb fingers. Dr. Ashford was at her side immediately, supporting her. "Is it done?" Ilara asked. "Did we do it?" "Look around," Dr. Ashford said gently. Ilara looked. The graveyard was just a graveyard now, still and peaceful. The oppressive weight of looped time was gone. In the distance she could hear the city waking up, people going about their early morning routines, unaware that they'd just been freed from a trap they'd never known they were in. "We did it," Dr. Ashford confirmed. "You did it. You saved them." Ilara wanted to feel triumphant, but all she felt was tired and shaken. "Crane," she said. "What he said about others like him, about a war. What did he mean?" Dr. Ashford's expression was grave. "That, I'm afraid, is a conversation for tomorrow. For now, let's go home. You've earned your rest." Part 8. The Legacy Accepted. The sun was rising as they walked back through the empty streets to Clockmaker's Close. Ilara was exhausted in a way she'd never experienced before, as if she'd run a marathon while simultaneously solving the most complex equation imaginable. Back in the workshop, Dr. Ashford made them both tea again, and they sat in silence for a while, watching the November dawn break over Edinburgh's rooftops. "I should tell you," Dr. Ashford finally said, "that you did something tonight that I've never seen a weaver do, not even Cornelius at his peak. You maintained the integrity of the threads while simultaneously fighting off another weaver's interference. Most would have simply tried to overpower Crane with brute force, which would have snapped the threads and created a catastrophic temporal void. You understood something instinctively that takes most weavers years to learn. Time wants to flow. Your job isn't to dam it up or redirect it, but to remove the obstacles that stop it from flowing naturally." "I almost didn't," Ilara admitted. "There was a moment when I saw what Crane was offering, and it was tempting. The idea that we could just fix everything, make history better. I know, and the fact that you recognized that temptation and resisted it is what makes you worthy of your uncle's legacy." Dr. Ashford set down her cup. "The Weavers' War that Crane mentioned, it's been going on for centuries, maybe longer. It's not a war in the conventional sense. There are no armies, no battles in any traditional meaning. It's a philosophical conflict that occasionally erupts into direct confrontation between people like Crane, who want to control time, and people like my uncle, who just want to preserve it. Essentially, yes. The controllers believe that time should be shaped, directed, optimized. They see humanity as children who need guidance, and themselves as the only ones wise enough to provide it. The preservers, which is what your uncle was, what you are now, believe that time must remain free to flow, that the uncertainty and possibility inherent in an uncontrolled timeline is essential to human existence. How many controllers are there? We don't know. They operate in secret, sometimes not revealing themselves for decades. Crane is one of the more aggressive ones. There are others who are more subtle, who work their influence slowly over years. The fact that he revealed himself to you suggests he's getting desperate, that whatever larger plan he's working toward is reaching a critical point. Ilara thought about this. You said there are only 12 Time Weavers left. How many are controllers versus preservers? Last we knew, 4 were definitely controllers. 3 are preservers, including you. The other 5, their allegiances are unclear, or they've withdrawn from the conflict entirely. That's not many people to defend all of time from being rewritten. No, Dr. Ashford agreed quietly. It's not. What happens now? Ilara asked. Dr. Ashford smiled. Now you learn. The workshop is yours, as is your uncle's library. He left detailed journals documenting every mend he made, every flaw he identified, every technique he developed. I'll help you go through them, teach you what I know. And when you're ready, there's a world full of temporal flaws that need attention. And Crane? We watch for him. We prepare. And if he resurfaces, we'll be ready. She paused. Your uncle spent the last 10 years of his life tracking Crane's work, undoing what damage he could find, preparing defenses against what he knew was coming. He left notes about several locations he suspected were being prepared as anchor points for large-scale loops like the one at Greyfriars. You'll need to investigate those, determine if they're still threats. Ilara looked around the workshop, at the silent clocks, the tools she was only beginning to understand, the loom that stood like a monument at the room's center. A week ago, she'd been a software engineer in Boston with a tidy apartment and a predictable life. Now she was a time weaver in Edinburgh with the responsibility of protecting the timeline itself. I don't know if I can do this, she said honestly. Neither did Cornelius when he started, Dr. Ashford replied. Neither did I when I first learned about time weaving. But here's what I've learned over 30 years of studying this. The people who are most worried about whether they can handle the responsibility are usually the ones best suited for it. It's the ones who are certain they can handle it that you need to worry about. Like Crane. Like Crane. Ilara picked up her spindle from where she'd set it on the table. It was still warm, still humming with that subsonic vibration. She could feel the threads of time all around her, could sense the flow of moments passing, the endless weaving of the present from the threads of possibility. All right, she said. Where do we start? Part 9. The Student. The next weeks fell into a rhythm that was intense but strangely comforting. Ilara threw herself into learning everything she could about time weaving, and Dr. Ashford proved to be an excellent teacher, patient but demanding. The workshop became Ilara's whole world. She studied her uncle's journals, which dated back 40 years, and were written in a mixture of English, Gaelic, and mathematical notation. Dr. Ashford helped her decipher them, explaining the theories and principles behind each technique. Time weaving operates at the intersection of several disciplines, Dr. Ashford explained one morning. Physics. Obviously, you need to understand how time works at a fundamental level. But also psychology, because time is experienced subjectively by conscious beings. History, because you need context to understand why certain flaws exist, and philosophy, because ultimately this work forces you to confront questions about free will, determinism, and the nature of reality itself. They worked through practical exercises. Elara learned to identify different types of temporal flaws, loops like the one at Greyfriars, gaps where moments had been erased, tangles where multiple timelines tried to exist simultaneously, and echoes where past events bled through into the present. She learned that each type of flaw required a different approach. Loops needed to be unwound gradually, like untying a knot. Gaps needed to be bridged carefully, finding threads from adjacent moments that could be coaxed into spanning the missing time. Tangles required patient separation, helping each timeline find its natural path. Echoes were the trickiest. They had to be dampened without being erased, because they often served important functions in the collective memory of a place. Think of echoes as the scar tissue of time, Dr. Ashford said. They're where something significant happened, and the timeline still remembers it. You don't want to erase that memory, but you also don't want it to be so strong that it interferes with the present. Edinburgh, it turned out, was full of echoes. The city's long and often violent history had left temporal impressions everywhere. Elara learned to sense them as she walked through the streets, faint shadows of past events that overlaid the present like translucent images. Edinburgh is one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in Europe, Dr. Ashford told her. Every year of existence adds another layer of temporal complexity. That's why your uncle chose to work here. It's like training at altitude. If you can handle Edinburgh's timeline, you can handle anywhere. But it wasn't all theory and practice. Dr. Ashford also shared stories about Cornelius, helping Elara understand the uncle she'd never met. He was brilliant but absent-minded, Dr. Ashford said with a fond smile. He'd spend hours perfecting the mend of some minor flaw, obsessing over getting every thread exactly right, and then forget to eat for a day and a half. I had to start bringing him meals just to make sure he didn't waste away. How did you meet him? I was a graduate student in physics at the university, researching temporal anomalies, which was considered rather crackpot science at the time. I published a paper about observed irregularities in time's flow. Everyone dismissed it as measurement error. Cornelius read it and showed up at my office the next day with a cup of coffee and an invitation to see something extraordinary. The workshop, the loom, proof that I wasn't crazy, that time really did behave in ways that physics couldn't fully explain. He needed someone who could help him document and theorize about what he was doing, and I needed to know I wasn't alone in seeing that there was something more to time than what the textbooks said. Were you and he? Elara left the question unfinished. Dr. Ashford smiled. No, not in that way. We were colleagues, friends. He was married to his work in a way that left little room for traditional relationships. But we understood each other, trusted each other. When he died, I lost the person who knew me better than anyone in the world. A text message buzzed on Dr. Ashford's phone. She checked it and her expression grew serious. We have a problem. There's been a report of temporal disturbance at the National Museum. Multiple witnesses reporting déjà vu, lost time, objects moving without being touched. It could be a natural flaw or crane. Are you ready for field work? Dr. Ashford asked. Let's find out, Elara said. Part 10. The Museum of Lost Moments. The National Museum of Scotland stood on Chambers Street, a Victorian Gothic building attached to a modern extension of glass and pale stone. Elara and Dr. Ashford arrived just before closing time, using credentials that Cornelius had maintained. The security guard, Douglas, let them in with a knowing look. It's in the Scottish History Galleries, he said quietly. 3rd floor. Started about 3 hours ago. Visitors complaining of feeling dizzy, of seeing things that weren't there. One woman swore she saw herself looking at the same display twice, standing next to herself. They took the elevator to the third floor. The moment the doors opened, Ilara felt the disturbance. It was like stepping into water, a resistance in the air that made movement feel sluggish. Her spindle began to vibrate urgently. The galleries were deserted, the artifacts lit by dim security lighting. And everywhere temporal echoes flickered and pulsed, far stronger than they should be. "This isn't natural," Dr. Ashford said. "Someone's amplifying the echoes deliberately." Ilara could see threads of timeline pulling away from their proper flow, reaching back into the past to grasp at the echoes of events long concluded. The museum's artifacts were acting as anchors, each one tied to its own history, and those histories were bleeding into the present. "He's trying to manifest the past," Ilara realized, "not just create a loop, but actually pull historical events into the present." A familiar voice answered from the shadows. "To prove it can be done." Silas Crane stepped into the gallery. He looked diminished from their last encounter, his timeline even thinner and more frayed. But his eyes burned with feverish intensity. "You're not well," Ilara said. "I'm transforming," Crane corrected. "Becoming something more than human. Time weavers shouldn't be bound by linear existence, because that's the nature of existence," Dr. Ashford said. "Everything that lives does so within time. Remove yourself from that flow, and you remove yourself from life itself." Crane raised his spindle, and the temporal distortions intensified. "What you're attempting will tear a hole in the timeline," Ilara said urgently. "If you pull the past into the present with this much force, you'll create a paradox that could collapse the entire continuum." "I've been planning this for months," Crane said. "The museum is perfect. So many artifacts, so much concentrated history. I'm going to prove that time can be rewritten, that the past isn't fixed." He thrust his spindle toward the center of the gallery, and reality screamed. The battlefield echo surged into full manifestation. The gallery floor became mud-churned by boots and hooves. The glass cases transformed into supply wagons, and standing in the middle of it all were the ghosts of soldiers from 3 centuries past. Men who had died at Culloden, suddenly pulled from their proper time. Ilara reached for her spindle and dove into the temporal stream. She could sense what Crane had done. He'd created a bridge between past and present, forcing them to occupy the same space. She began working to separate the timelines, to push the past back to where it belonged. "Dr. Ashford," Ilara shouted, "the anchors! Find them and break them!" Ilara felt her control slipping. There were too many threads, too much temporal energy flowing in wrong directions. She needed to find the center of Crane's working, the main anchor that was holding this impossible construction together. And then she saw it. Crane himself. He'd woven himself into the working, made his own timeline the central thread that connected past and present. "You've tied yourself into this," Ilara said, horrified. "If I undo your work, it will kill you." "I've already died, Ilara," Crane said calmly. "I've been dying for years. This is my final work, my masterpiece. Either I succeed and transcend, or I fail and burn out." "There's another option," Ilara said. "Let me help you. We can undo the manifestation together, restore the proper flow." "And then what?" Crane's laugh was bitter. "Return to small mendings? I've seen too much, Ilara. I've walked through history. I've seen the mistakes that could have been prevented. I can't unknow that." "Then you force my hand," Ilara said quietly. She reached out with her spindle toward the threads of Crane's own timeline. She could save him or save the timeline. Not both. "I'm sorry," she whispered. And then she pulled. Crane's thread snapped. The temporal bridge collapsed, the manifested echoes rushing back to their proper moments. The battlefield disappeared. The Victorian street vanished. In seconds, the gallery was just a gallery again. Crane fell to his knees. "You did what you had to," he gasped. "What Cornelius taught you. Preserve the flow. Protect the timeline. I wasn't always like this, but I saw too much, knew too much. The burden of knowledge, it corrupts. Remember that." "I will," Ilara promised. Crane's thread gave a final shudder and came apart. He dissolved into light, into time itself. He was gone. "You did the right thing," Dr. Ashford said. "He gave you no choice." "I know," Ilara said, "but it doesn't feel right. It rarely does. That's how you know you're still human, still connected to the normal flow of existence."
Part 12. The First Mission. A week later, Ilara stood at the Waverley Station platform waiting for the train that would take her to her first solo mission. Dr. Ashford had helped her pack, essentials only, plus her spindle and a copy of Cornelius's most relevant notes. The first site she'd chosen to investigate was in the Scottish borders, near the village of Melrose. Cornelius's notes suggested a weak point in the timeline there, centered on the ruins of Melrose Abbey. He'd marked it as dormant but watching, whatever that meant.